Hello, hello. No audio
Hi.
from me. Can you hear me okay? Hi, guys.
Yeah, I
Hi.
can hear you.
Oh, weird.
Everything
Yeah.
working.
Audio just sounds strange on my side, but okay, I'll fix it. Happy Monday, all. How is everyone doing?
Doing well. Good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. I'm frantically clicking buttons to fix the audio. I don't know why it is messed up on my side, but oh well. Everybody had a nice weekend? Everybody's
It,
having audio problems today.
it was Easter in
Hey, how's it
Ukraine
going?
Oh,
on
yes. Yeah.
Sunday.
Did you say
Yeah,
it was
but
Easter? Is that what you said?
yeah,
Adam?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was Easter in Ukraine because we use like old calendar. Hopefully next year
Yeah.
Ukraine move to the same calendar as the rest of the world. So we'll have Christmas and Easter and everything at the same dates.
Yeah, is that actually maybe going to happen?
Yeah, like church discuss like right now there is like separation from people treat like old calendar is something from Russia, so they want to
Oh,
deal with it. So that's why like the whole. But for me, it's like great because calendar is synchronized. You have the same
yeah,
weekends as everybody else.
that's
Yeah.
exactly. Oh, well, hopefully. Great. Well, sorry I had to miss last week's meeting, but how are things going in Defer and Stream and Incremental Delivery Land for everybody?
Yeah. So in the past few weeks, I know that Yakov has his implementation working where it's
Nice.
basically the same output as we had before, but without any branching.
Mhm.
We made the solution criteria. I don't know if everyone has seen that.
Yes.
We talked about that at the last working group, which was a pretty small meeting.
Yeah.
And I wrote up a gist with all examples of the proposal that Benji put forward, the most up-to-date one with some tweaks that we talked about over the last week. So I guess what I would like to get consensus on next is like if this Benji proposal is like the direction that we want to move forward in, if we can make that decision or if we need to explore anything else. Have you guys gone over the solution criteria? Do we want to spend the meeting like going through that in depth, or should we go through the proposal?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, like last week, it was like a call last week or not?
Last Monday there was no call.
Okay. No, so I didn't miss. Okay.
We canceled
Yeah,
last Monday.
Okay. And because I said like a small meeting, I thought maybe I like. Yeah. So
Yeah, I was referring to the primary GraphQL working group. That it was just, I think, me, Benji, Yvonne, Matt, and Michael.
Yeah, let's do you have links to the solution criteria? Maybe I haven't seen that. Sorry, I was just digging around for it. Thank you very much. No, I totally missed this. This is great. Thank you. Awesome. Did you already get feedback on this, Rob? Did people already have a chance to go through this?
Yeah, we did go through it at the main working group meeting.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Do you feel like you got enough feedback on it, or should we go through it some more?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Ivan.
I'm viewing through them, and actually I have like some clarification. Maybe we can get a quick round on solution
Sure.
criteria since everybody have a link.
Yeah.
And if you can open it. So I have like idea, and I think it would be more. How do we want to do it? Like reading one by one, or for example, I'm okay with A, B, and I have like some clarification for C.
Before we run through it, I guess the one question I have is, yeah, again, sorry, I wasn't at the working group meeting, but did the people on the call all agree with the scoring that's in the doc right now?
I think there was a few small recommendations which I did incorporate.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask next. So this is the most up-to-date snapshot
yeah.
of kind of what people are thinking. Okay, great.
And actually, I didn't go through the minor ones. I just only went through the critical and major.
Yeah, which
at that meeting.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
makes sense. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, Ivan, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, so like I'm looking for a document. I didn't do my homework before this call, but I'm looking it through it now, and I'm like, for example, A and B totally makes sense, and for C, I would make it stricter. Because it's like right now it's say about one value per path, which is important. But another important thing is you should be able to construct the same result as you would get in totally synchronous variant. So
now I don't I intentionally didn't include that because I think that it's not possible for cases where you have null bubbling inside of a defer. You can't like null bubble back up to the initial result. So
no, yeah, I mean not by applying patches. I mean like if clients wants, it's important for caching and for like, for example, if we speak about intermediate server and like it wants to store operation as like normalized cache for some reason, for something else, or you want to support like a legacy part of your systems that don't know about stream and defer. Smart client with code, not like with simple patches, but with code, it should be enough info, and this info should not be like contradict each other, that client can construct. It's maybe it's not in a straightforward way, maybe like with some coding, but it should be possible.
I mean, what would it satisfy that criteria? I mean, like, what about the case where you do have a null that should bubble all the way up and get data null? Just that would be the whole query without defer.
Yeah. So for example, whole query without defer thing. So we get like part of responses, and when you get an error, but error have a correct path. So even though like you technically get the data that you should not supposed to get, but you should have ability to read payloads and understand like if I want to mash it up at the top level, it should be null.
So if I understand what you're saying, Ivan, you're basically saying, and this requires that the client understands the schema. So it's not reliant only on the payload, but also on the schema knowledge. You're saying the error that comes through from stream and defer we could look at the path of that, see that an error has been thrown. We could compare that with the schema, see that all the intermediate fields are non-nullable, and thus the client can choose to null out the whole thing, should it so choose, rather than us doing so from the server.
If it's have like use case, for example, it's want to store it in the cache, or it's want to like I don't know, like for example, there is two components, one query shared between two components. One component is like stream diff already, and one is like dump component that expect like stuff without stream differ. So in this case, ideally, in ideal world, it could be done with, ideally, it would be done without schema knowledge, but even if it requires schema knowledge, it's still better than don't have opportunity to do that. Like, or maybe it's like, I need to look into your proposal, Benji, and see if it's like, if it satisfies that criteria. Maybe I'm going from bad side. I'm trying to formalize criteria that up until now, like all the proposals satisfy basically. Yeah, but
Yeah, I mean, if
just
it's without having schema knowledge, then I think that there hasn't been any proposals that satisfy that.
And with schema
interesting.
knowledge, I think they probably all do, because the error information, the error path is still maintained.
Yeah, interesting. I need to thought about that. So yeah.
Well, yeah. Thanks for summarizing this. Sorry, I just read through your proposal, the other doc that you shared, Rob. This is great. But it sounds like based out of the last working group meeting and these meetings, like this is our winner. So mostly so far, it looks like it meets all the criteria except for a couple of the minor ones.
Yeah, and so I guess basically I want to know, like, is there any criteria that is important that we don't know about, that this wouldn't that would prevent us from moving forward with that proposal?
Yeah, this is
I
yeah,
definitely
great question.
want to get feedback from Matt and other like Facebook people, especially maybe the Relay team.
Yeah, I'm going to circulate these links across Apollo as well, so get some more feedback there.
I have hi. I have one question. Just for clarification. It sounds like I mean, it sounds pretty clear from the proposal that the labels don't affect execution. They're only there to minimize sorry, if you know, for a client, like sort of for explanation or explanatory purposes. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So then if a client, I just want to make sure I'm getting it right, because I think I might not be. If a client at this you know, if there are two different defer fragments at the same level that you know put forward by two different components, those you know, each component has to wait for the other one. Is that right? Because you know, is that correct?
No, that's not correct. I think it's actually laid out in one of Rob's examples, sibling defers. I'm just scanning through, as is Rob. I think example D, maybe.
Okay, let me pull that up.
These are different paths, but I definitely had one where they were at the same path.
Oh, E.
It's E, I think, yeah.
But those two are identical, so that's not an ideal example either.
Okay, yeah, I can add another one.
I
But-
think though that for now, D is probably the closest that will give you the same kind of behavior. So in this situation, Yakov, if you imagine that the second defer is moved inside of the me, then that is effectively describing what you say. In this case, the two defers would be able to be delivered separately, but effectively the list and item would become a common payload, for want of a better term, a common incremental entry that would be delivered with whichever of A or B completes first. So yeah, as you can see, Rob's just highlight that. So that's the common bit. And in this case, the first defer came first, as you can see from the ID 123. So we get the common one, and then we get the ID 123. And then later, in a later payload, we get the value foobar baz, which was from the second defer. So they don't have to wait for each other, even without labels. Adding a label doesn't change that they don't have to wait for each other.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so it sounds like we're close. We just need to figure out if there's anything we're missing that needs to be part of the solution criteria that we're just not catching here. And I think the way to get that is just get this in front of more people.
The other big issue, I think, at the moment is that this is not actually in any form of spec text or
Right.
implementation, as far as I know. So those are two big tasks. This is more thinking of it from
Yeah.
the point of view of what are we actually delivering to the user? Does that
Yes.
delivery with some kind of mental model of like a rough idea of how it works using field collection kind of thing. But actually, I know from having written up my previous proposal that trying to actually mesh it into the execution model is quite challenging.
Yes.
I have been working on implementing it,
Oh, nice.
and I feel like I mean, what I did is like not ready for any kind of review or anything, but I feel like I've gotten enough of it in there that I'm pretty confident that implementing it won't be like a gigantic challenge. I think it's actually a lot of the complexities that are in Yakov's implementation aren't necessary with this result. So I think it's overall a little bit simpler. I mean, very well, there could be something I'm missing, but I've tried like a couple of examples like this, and I'm pretty confident that
looking
it's
promising.
workable.
That's great.
That's excellent, Rob. Thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, I'm sharing it with people as we speak, so I'll definitely try to get some more feedback.
Yeah, should we actually just like walk through each of these examples?
Yeah.
And I can point out like the things that I think are important from each one.
Before
let's do it.
we get into that, Rob, you and I were discussing privately about this execution. Would
Yeah.
it make sense to discuss that first, whilst we've still got a reasonable amount of time? Because I think it could be a can of worms.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so to give a brief summary of this, you may remember that Michael Stabe implemented an early version of Stream and Defer ages ago and gave feedback from his users that basically said, if we don't start executing the deferred fields up front, then the total time to deliver the entire payload can get significantly larger, right? So ideally, we want to start executing things as early as possible and just deliver them, when they're ready. I.e., we shouldn't be doing everything that's not deferred and then doing the things that are deferred afterwards. That's what Michael says. Rob agrees.
That's
and
one of these criteria. Yeah.
Makes a ton of sense.
I, however, do not agree, or at least I don't mind things starting executing beforehand if the server decides that's the case. But I think the spec algorithm should be written in a way where you imply that they are started afterwards, like you do all of the non-deferred stuff first and then everything else afterwards. And there's a few reasons for that. One is that it significantly simplifies how the spec would be written, I believe anyway. Rob may have already solved this in a different way though, so I shan't speak too much to that. The main issue that I have is that you can't undo resolvers. So if a resolver has a side effect, you can't undo that. You can choose not to deliver it, but if there's a side effect there, it can be problematic. And I know that there are people that are doing, what they call nested mutations, where they have fields that are on the child fields of entries on the mutation type. So it's 2 levels deep, for example. Now, we don't forbid this in the GraphQL spec, but we don't allow it. Like we say, mutation is where mutation is where the side effects happen. We don't explicitly state that side effects must not happen outside of mutation, as far as I know. And I might need to read the spec in full to be sure of that, but I'm pretty sure that's
I think you're
the
right.
case. So there are people that are doing it, despite the fact that there are side effects, and it is actually quite a widely, like it's been in conference talks at GraphQL conferences. So it's not something that we can ignore. Now, if we mix defer and stream with this, and we allow like a defer within one of the mutation fields, the GraphQL spec doesn't see non-mutation fields as anything special. So this is where the risk of like null bubbling and the handling of it could actually have unexpected side effects. So for example, if you start executing something early that you're ultimately never going to deliver because its a sibling blew up and therefore the null should have exploded, we can't undo that side effect. So there is that risk, and I think that could actually leak into other areas, and basically there's some amount of complexity there. So anyway, I'll open it up to the floor now.
Yeah, so I feel like the spec can't say you have to wait until everything's done. It should provide like the ability for servers to do early execution. I also don't think it should say that you have to do early execution. We could write the spec as if you are doing it and say you can delay as long as you want.
Just be aware of, the side effects.
Right. But I think that it's like, my thoughts were that we should write the spec with early execution and have all the caveats of what you have to do of, don't deliver this payload if a sibling nulls out. That was like a thing that we discussed a while back, and we have the code to do that. So that, because otherwise, if we do make the spec simpler by assuming that this execution is like doesn't happen, that if we make the spec text will definitely be simpler if we make the assumption that the execution gets pushed back. And I feel like that it shouldn't just be like, if a server decides to do it earlier, we don't have everything documented of what needs to happen. I'm not sure if I explained that well.
Yeah.
I think it's reasonable for servers to do both, but I think that the spec should say exactly what has to happen when it's happening early. So that's why I would have the spec do the more complex case.
Yeah, I think if we have the spec specifically make it mandatory that you have to wait in execution, we're going to have all sorts of GraphQL servers that optimize anyways to fire the deferred stuff right away. So there's going to be a lot of implementations that are just going against what the spec would say.
And
So
then they might
wanna,
not be doing like filtering, so they'll send you payloads that point to paths that don't exist. And
I think that any server that implemented an optimization like that would still have to ensure, I mean, the whole thing at the beginning of the spec is it says that the observable result should be the same. So if you choose to execute stuff early, that's your choice, but you must make sure that the delivery of it still conforms to the spec. At the moment, execution and delivery in the spec are the same thing, like they are not separate concepts. That may not be the case when we do defer and stream, because we've got this like idea of batching and sending things a bit, you know, sending this like shared thing we talked about with Yakov just now, and various other stuff that means that maybe execution and delivery will become a little bit different. But I've also thought there was this other concern other than these nested mutations. Imagine that you've got a whole bunch of resolvers that query a database, and you've optimized your system to put all of your queries into a queue, because you want to share this same database connection for everything in your current, maybe even in a transaction, whatever, for anything in the current GraphQL request. If you were to kick off one of your deferred fields as part of the early execution, you might add that to the queue, and then one of the non-deferred fields might need to do something that requests the database as well, in which case it would go after that point in the queue, which means effectively the deferred thing would need to be completed before the non-deferred stuff can, based on what you put in your resolvers. So there is, like, my main issue with this is that we don't control what people have in their resolvers. And there could be all sorts of clever optimizations that people have done in their business logic that will not be able to be leveraged, or won't be able to leverage stream and defer if there's this kind of situation in there. Again, it's another concern related.
I could see it going the other way too. Like, maybe in this query, like the queue is mostly empty most of the time while the synchronous stuff is being resolved, and now your queue is like filled up with the defer stuff, and that could be while you have like other traffic from other requests coming in. And because like the time spent on the query is stretched out, it could be impacting the non-deferred part of other requests. Is that?
I was imagining a per request queue, much like how data loader does per request batching. But yeah, I mean, there could be situations like that anyway. Anyway, the main thing is I wanted to raise that as something that I am concerned about, and that we should factor in to when we do write up the spec changes. If we choose to, in the spec, talk about early execution, then I think we should keep all of these different complexities in mind. I personally still favor simplicity. But I think that's enough discussing that for now. Rob, do you want to continue with what you were going to do before, going through the examples?
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So example A, this is basically demonstrating that fields that are shared between the deferred and non-deferred part are extracted. They're only sent in this initial payload. Any intermediary objects are never sent more than once. The result here, the only things in the first defer that are different are J and K. So that's sent in your first incremental. You get your pending with the second D2 label, and now you're getting L and M. Just general stuff. Pending is what's telling you what defers are queued for execution. The path we decided is always going to point to the path where the defer is. Label is an array if there are labels that match. Each one gets assigned an ID. Then an incremental, the path is kind of used as like a subpath of that ID. So if this ID was pretty long, it wouldn't be repeated in each incremental. And then there's a completed array that tells you when a certain ID is done. And the contract is that we're not sending any incremental data fields until everything is completed for that execution for a corresponding ID. And if things are shared, they're not sent again. But whatever wasn't sent, when that's ready, that's when you get the rest of them. This one is similar, but there's a field at the top of the defer and one all the way at the bottom. They're both sent together. Even if one is ready before the other, they're sent together. ID 0 is completed. This is the one with overlapping fields. So here's the example where slow field A completes first. So you have one payload with potentially slow field A and another payload with E and F. ID 1 is completed. That's the label A over here with the longer path. Then when this one is completed, you're getting G and slow field B. And the way that fields are going to be grouped into one incremental when all of those fields have the same selection of defers. So if there's a field that's shared between different defers, then that would get broken out into its own incremental. That's what happened with E and F, because that's when we know these things are on the server basically executing separately. And when it's, you would get this. All right. In the example with slow field B, it's these incremental objects are the same objects. They're just returned in different order. That, I guess that's what a simpler way of what I was trying to say.
Rob, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
With what you've got before, and I mean, these are very much based on what I've written, so this is my own fault. As you express it to me now, I actually wonder that that shared payload that has the ID 1, that's actually technically shared between ID 0 and 1, right?
Yes, right.
I'm wondering whether we should actually specify that. So like ID should be maybe an array with both 0 and 1 in it.
But then it gets weird when you have the subpath. Which one is it based off of? I was thinking
right.
that the ID would just be whichever is the longest path if it applies to more than one, just to minimize the size of the subpath.
Yeah, or just whichever one is being delivered with it, like next, whichever one triggered it to be delivered, I think is what I was thinking of.
Yeah, there could be more than one though. It could be that everything is ready and you have all three of these here, and then they're being delivered together.
Yeah, good point.
So
okay, excellent. Well, amazing. Well done for already thinking about this.
yeah, I wrote longer ID is preferred, or that's not clear, but let me just edit that right now. Yeah. This example shows that there's three different defers here, and there's this one, they're all the same, except for this one has A and B, this one has only A, and this one has A and C. And I think I need to look at this example again. This doesn't look right. I don't think A and B should be in the same object, because no, they should. In this case, this one, does this have, what happens here? Yeah, I need to go back to this one. This one doesn't look right. I think that A and B should be in separate incrementals because they're in separate defers.
Yeah, field A is shared at the same defer level. So it should be in its own
Mhm.
incremental. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, this is the one where everything is shared except ID and value. And so what's interesting here is that list and item are all sent in one. And now because these children are in different defers, they're separated out into separate payloads. So you have all the IDs for here, and then all of the values in their own payloads so that 1 and 0 can complete independently of each other. And this one shows that if you have two defers with different labels and the fields overlap entirely, that's the case of where label is an array with more than one object. So there's really only one thing being executed, but it has multiple labels.
And that would also be the case if B was missing from one of those, right? If one of them was just A and the other one was AB. No,
Right.
no, that's not true. That's
Right.
not true.
Right, that's not true because the A could complete independently on its own ahead
Yeah.
of B.
Sorry for the confusion there.
Here's a defer that doesn't have any fields in it. So this one is just it's as if it was not there.
Right.
There's no fields to execute. It's not going to be in pending. It's not going to be completed. It's nothing. It's a no op, I guess. Here's the one from your example where we show that even though these defers are at the same level, yeah, I guess it's the one we were looking for before. Even though these defers are at the same level, they both have a path of me. They're still executed separately. And I think maybe there's a question here because we were talking about how we have the logic for defers not being sent, pointing to a path that doesn't exist. But we had also previously said that if you're at the same level, even if you're nested through other fragments, they could still come like previous. This one could come before billing because they're at the same path, but maybe we should discuss that again. I'll add it to a list of things to discuss later. So in this example, we're going to say that Baz resolves before Quux. Quux is a non-nullable field and it returns null. So what happens is both of these are pending. Then Baz resolves and you get this result foo bar Baz. Now Quux resolves null. It's a non-nullable field, so bar should be nulled, but bar was sent already. So our rule is that if because of null bubbling, anything is going to overwrite a field that was already sent, then instead that whole fragment is not going to be sent. We were not going to send any inconsistent results, so it has to be nulled. Clients should treat it almost as if it was like a fragment that was skipped, but you'll have the error in here and you're not going to get this another field or foo because of that inconsistency, which can't be resolved. Yeah, so that's all the yeah, in Benji's previous proposal, he was doing done on incremental instead of completed. And when I talked with him about that, I suggested completed for the fact that it's possible that you may be sending one field that resolves multiple defers. So in this example, each one overlaps slightly with another one. And so we say that Baz takes the longest here. So you get back foo, you get back bar, and this one's completed. Now we're just waiting for Baz, and that's going to resolve both. So instead of having a done on here that says only one and maybe something else that says that 2 is done, we just say have this completed object that says 1 and 2 are both done by this one
Interesting.
object. Then the solution criteria. Let's see what O is. I think it does solve this because by predictable, that means that in that case where we have E and F, this one with these two potentially slow fields, I think it's predictable because you know that there's going to be one payload with E and F, there's going to be one payload with this, and there's going to be one payload with that, because that's how they overlap. I guess it depends on your definition of predictable. So that's why I put a question mark. What it doesn't solve is a full fragment returned in each payload. That's basically what we had before, where your response pretty much mirrors the fragment that was deferred. But that gives you the trade-offs of having to send intermediary objects multiple times, larger payloads. And we had also talked about this, how the GraphQL spec says that you should preserve field ordering. That seems like almost impossible, where like I should write the example, but
I just
an
saw your
example like this.
Q makes me
Hey.
sad, Benji.
It's like, how are you going to tell the client that this B needs to go in between A and C when it's delivered? So
I don't
have
think
these
we've
here.
solved that with any proposal that we've come up with so far.
Right.
None of them have addressed this issue. I think potentially the only way to do it would be to like feed in B with a null and then overwrite it later. But I think that's a terribly bad idea, and we should definitely not do that. Yeah, as I said in chat, it makes me sad because it's not worth the effort, the amount of transport that we'd have to consume to solve it. I just don't think it's worth it. But also, it was all beautiful until then.
Mhm.
Well, it's on the solution criteria list, and I don't want to give anyone a perfect score, so I'm not going to remove it. But yeah, any questions about this? Anything else that's not clear in here in this document?
No, I think it's clear. Yeah, other than the one you notice needs to be updated, but yep.
So, Hugh, whilst you're discussing this internally with Apollo and anyone else as well, I would definitely spend some time thinking through example H and the explosion of the fragments. I think that is the right decision, but it definitely has, it may not be super intuitive to users, or it may have side effects we've not thought of. Or,
Yep.
It might not always be the right thing. I think it definitely needs thought.
Okay. Yep, I'll call that one out in particular.
Yeah, this is another case of removing the defers is not going to give you the same reconciled object. I think the two cases that this proposal has where that's not true is for no bubbling, where if something bubbles above the level of a defer, I mean, without knowledge of the schema, the client doesn't have a way to null out stuff that's already sent. And here, where because bar is nullable, if the defers were removed, you would actually get another field in your response, but you're not anymore, because we can't safely deliver this whole fragment.
Benoit, is your audio working? Sorry, you mentioned it wasn't working.
Yes, sorry.
Hi. Yeah, no, great. And what do you think so far about this? Since this would mean some changes for Kotlin, for example, the Kotlin client.
Yeah, definitely some changes, but from what, so I haven't dug too much. I really have to dig more on this, but from what I'm seeing, I think everything is there for us to implement it.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
So yeah, basically this looks good so far, but I will need to think of how to implement it a bit in more details. But first
looks
feelings
okay.
are good.
Yeah. Does the completed versus done thing at the bottom as one of the I think that was in this doc, or was it one of the docs? Sorry, where you had
Yeah,
it.
it's here.
Yeah. Any issues with that you can think of, Benoit? Would that be a big deal?
I don't think so.
Okay, awesome.
I don't
Just
think
wanna
so,
make
but
sure.
yeah, maybe I'm missing something, but no, I think that's
It should be fine. Okay. Cool. All right.
Rob,
Well, that's exciting.
Rob won me around on that one.
Yeah.
Like it definitely, it's kind of it's the mirroring of the pending. So you get the pending and then you get the completed, and they're like two separate things. And then in between, you've got the incremental, which is its own like area of concern, if you will.
Oh,
so yeah, I
yeah, that's a
definitely
good way
think
of looking at it. Yeah.
it makes a
that's
lot of
interesting.
Basically,
sense.
this is metadata about what's being executed, as this is metadata about what was completed, and this is the actual data.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. We should write that out.
Mhm.
It's a good way to explain it to people. Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again for putting that all together. Definitely we'll keep you posted as we get some feedback.
Yeah, I'll put these
from the
links
Apollo side.
back. I'll send them both again to the Discord channel.
Awesome. I need to keep remembering to check Discord. I always forget. Sorry. Too many places to look for things. The problem we all have.
Anything else that
Cool.
we should discuss in this
Yeah.
meeting now?
Were other folks excited about this at the working group call? Like, does it just general consensus?
Yeah, we
seems like
spent
we're on the right
more
track?
time on the solution criteria than we did on this proposal at the working group.
The
Makes
working
sense.
group only had people in it that have attended this meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. Well, it's good use of time then.
Yeah, but it was good because Matt and Michael were there and they had missed a bunch of these meetings. So
yeah,
I think they got caught up at least on the solution criteria.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, yeah. So now we'll get some feedback on this, and then I guess it sounds like Rob, you're kind of already hacking away at an implementation of this, and yeah, it'll be interesting to hear how that goes.
Yeah. And I actually probably could get the spec PR. I could probably update the last one that I did, like the 2B proposal, to include this because I think it's pretty minor difference.
Mhm.
And yeah, I want to talk to Yakov some more about the implementation and what can be factored out of both of ours and to move forward.
Sounds great. Thanks very much for doing that. Yeah.
And I think it is worth, if there is common things like Yakov's previous proposal in the spec with the subfields, if that makes sense with your proposal, or your writing up of our proposal, I suppose, then it would be good to get those changes into maybe not necessarily into the spec, but into a stack, so that we can review them layer by layer and merge them bit by bit, rather than having just one massive stream and defer change at the end, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. Excellent work, Rob.
Cool.
Thank you
Yes.
so much for laying this all out and for hacking away in the background at it and keeping it going. You must be putting a lot of time into this, and we will appreciate
yes.
it.
Definitely appreciate it. And yeah, it's going to be exciting. We'll get there. We'll get through
Yeah,
it
thank
all.
you all for your help.
Yeah, this is great. Cool. All right. Well, on with Monday, I guess. And we'll talk again soon.
Thanks
Bye,
all.
Take care
everyone.
all. Yep. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.